This is Left Voices for Thursday, April 3rd, 2014. I'm Andrea Sears. Tonight,
you don't have to wait for Congress to fix these problems, and you don't have to wait for some court. These are issues that can be decided essentially in your backyard.
State and local governments are taking on the NSA. The National Security Agency is building a huge data storage center in Utah. It long ago reached the limit of the power grid in Fort Meade, Maryland, where its headquarters are located. Besides power, the massive computer systems at the Utah facility, located in a desert, will need water to keep the processors cool. An estimated 1.2 to 1.7 million gallons a day. That water, a limited resource, would be supplied by the Jordan Valley River Conservancy District, a political subdivision of the state of Utah. Some privacy advocates are seeing this as an opportunity to fight against the NSA's bulk surveillance of innocent Americans. They want the state to turn off the tap. Last month, the Utah State Records Committee voted unanimously to require the city of Bluffdale to release details of the NSA's water use, bringing that aspect of the data center into the public debate. It's part of a broader effort that's included the introduction of a bill called the Fourth Amendment Protection Act in several state legislatures. Shahid Buttar, executive director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, says these efforts are part of a growing grassroots movement to stop mass surveillance through state and local action.
In the last 12 years since the Patriot Act was first enacted, over 400 cities in 8 states have taken formal action to at least declare their support for the Bill of Rights. And in order for those declarations of state and local fidelity to constitutional principles to have any force, the states and localities have to start biting off enforceable chunks. Ultimately, the question about whether or not a state can execute this, there are 2 impediments. One is political and one is legal. The political impediment is, can enough members of the state legislature sign on to those bills to see them through passage? And with these bills having been introduced in over a dozen states and gotten out of the committees, and I believe 2 so far, I am confident that the political checks will be overcome. The legal question is whether or not courts will see fit to uphold the anti-commandeering doctrine, which gives states the authority to decide how to use their resources, for instance, like water or electricity, in the face of federal requirements to give it, to commandeer it, basically by the federal government. That doctrine against the supremacy clause of the Constitution, which says that in matters like foreign policy, the federal government is supreme. The issue here ultimately is that the NSA spying program is both foreign policy and domestic. And so because it's a domestic assault on constitutional rights and it consumes state resources, I think it's ultimately a pretty easy legal question. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people are surprised that we the people still have a voice, and this is one of the ways that we can raise it.
Another strategy is for states to ban the use of evidence gained through warrantless wiretapping in court. But I assume that states can only ban the use of such evidence in state courts, not in federal courts.
The NSA has provided evidence used by federal prosecutors who have lied to judges about where their evidence came from. And we know that's happened in at least some drug enforcement cases. The bill would only restrict state courts and state prosecutors, and we don't have confirmation of state prosecutors having been co-opted in this nefarious effort to undermine the legitimacy of the criminal justice system. But I wouldn't describe it as an alternative strategy. The bills that have been introduced in multiple state legislatures around the country do include all of these provisions. There's a counter-recruitment provision to keep the NSA off the public universities. There's the resources provision to make sure that the NSA isn't essentially diverting state water and power to fuel its unconstitutional and un-American surveillance. And there's the provision to guard the legitimacy of the criminal justice system by ensuring that polluted evidence, that is to say evidence that the defendant never gets to see, doesn't end up infecting criminal trials.
With the proliferation of things like fusion centers, where the federal government shares information with local law enforcement officials, isn't this a real danger that information gained through warrantless wiretapping can leak into state and local law enforcement efforts?
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm really glad to hear you raise the question. It just so happens that on April 10th, coming up later this month, is a National Day of Action to draw attention to fusion centers as a part of the domestic surveillance state that has largely escaped notice while so many people have been focused on the NSA. But the fact of the matter is that the intelligence industrial complex is, for all intents and purposes, a racket, and it is metastatic across not only the federal government and the intelligence agencies, but also local and state police. And they have absolutely become embroiled across the country in what I would describe as a parallel war on the constitutional rights of their residents, specifically the Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as the First Amendment around speech, assembly, and association. Multiple fusion centers, for instance, the Missouri Information Analysis Center or the North Central Texas Fusion Center, both of those fusion centers issued threat reports classifying constitutionally protected speech activity as indicative of terrorism. And that's exactly what fusion centers should not be allowed to do, and it's exactly why they should be subjected to oversight that they are not currently, and they're not transparent. Their funding streams are not transparent. It is, I dare say, corrupt. And I think the opportunity for NSA evidence to come through the fusion centers and end up in the hands of state and local police is deeply, deeply problematic. The alternative scenario would be local police collecting information about someone's, for instance, protest or political activity, and then that getting fed up to the federal agencies. And we know that that has happened too.
How many state legislatures has the Fourth Amendment Protection Act been introduced in, and how has it been received?
The Fourth Amendment Protection Act has been introduced, I believe, in 16 state legislatures. It is a bipartisan bill in the vast majority of them. 2 states in which it conspicuously is not bipartisan, where Democrats have not seen fit to embrace it, are Maryland and Utah. These are 2 states where the NSA has spying centers, and it's particularly disturbing to see Democrats essentially distracted by their partisan loyalties of the president and averse to what is ultimately a progressive and libertarian, anti-establishment, popular constitutionalist reform to force constitutional compliance on the part of the federal government. A lot of Democrats were willing to criticize warrantless surveillance when it was the Bush administration doing it. The co-optation of progressives by the Obama administration on particularly this policy issue, I think is deeply problematic not only for the country and not only for the Democratic Party, because it gives a lifeline to Republicans who can then brand themselves as pro-civil liberties, but also it spells a grave danger to progressivism ideologically, because progressivism is built on a commitment to values like equality, like sustainability, that ultimately emerge from liberty commitments, whether it's the liberty of the next generation or the liberty of the poor and dispossessed to lead lives free of deprivation of basic needs. When progressives abandon those liberty principles, we veer headlong in an authoritarian direction, which we have seen in the world before and which was not pretty.
What kind of efforts are underway now to advance the Fourth Amendment Protection Act in legislatures around the country?
Around the country, in each of the states where these bills have been introduced, grassroots coalitions are conducting public education actions like teach-ins. There have been a series of presentations, for instance, in Utah and Maryland. There are events that will be coming up this summer. There's an event happening in just a week at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, talking specifically about this bill and the opportunity for states to mount resistance to federal spying. And that's basically on the doorsteps of the NSA headquarters just outside Baltimore and Fort Meade. This is a vibrant discourse. I think it's a huge action opportunity. The most important thing I'd draw your listeners' attention to is that you don't have to wait for Congress to fix these problems, and you don't have to wait for some court. These are issues that can be decided essentially in your backyard, and that's how the Constitution was established in the first place, was by we the people raising our voice. And it is an absolutely critical time in American history and the history of democracy in this country to raise our voices and be very assertive, and quite frankly to join common cause with anyone who sees the problem in similar terms. Because if we don't, we will be locked in a very predictable future course, which is to say ever-expanding executive power, ever-narrowing constitutional rights and liberties. The trajectory is quite clear, and there is only one way to make sure that the station that this train reaches is one that looks like a free country, and that's for those of us who care enough about the issue to join together and raise our voices everywhere we can.
Shahid Buttar is Executive Director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. This has been Left Voices for Thursday, April 3rd, 2014. You can help support this experiment in independent journalism by visiting our website at www.leftvoices.net and following the Ways to Support Left Voices link at the top of the page. Join us again tomorrow for more news and information from a progressive perspective. I'm Andrea Sears for leftvoices.net.